Welcome back to Sage Connections. Today is a slightly different episode. It's a solo episode. And I want to talk about one of the most common misconceptions in pelvic health, that Kegels are the one size fits all answer to every pelvic floor problem. So many women are just told, just go do Kegels for any variety of symptoms, whether it's incontinence or pelvic pain or pelvic fullness or heaviness. Sometimes Kegels can actually make your symptoms worse. So let's break down what's going on. What is a Kegel? When does it help? When doesn't it help? And what can we actually do if it's not helping? For those of you who are new, I am an outpatient orthopedic physical therapist that specializes in pelvic floor physical therapy specifically. I'm also the owner of Sage Physical Therapy and Wellness in Farmington, Michigan. I help women connect with their pelvic floor and their body throughout the lifespan, whether it's pregnancy, postpartum, or menopause, anything in between and beyond. So let's talk about the myth. The myth is that, as we said, that Kegels are the recommendation for absolutely everything. If you have any kind of pelvic floor symptom, just go do Kegels, right? But the muscles are not always weak. Even with incontinence, it's not always because of pelvic floor weakness. A lot of the time, it's because either the pelvic floor is overactive or too tight, or there's just a lack of coordination of those pelvic floor muscles with your breathing. So think about if you have tight jaw muscles, you're not going to keep clenching your jaw to help relax the jaw, right? We got to do something that's kind of the opposite of that. So let's talk about what is even a Kegel. A Kegel is a pelvic floor contraction. It's the motion that it's the feeling that you have when you're trying to hold in urine or when you're trying to hold in gas. It's those muscles squeezing, contracting, lifting. Those are some of the terms that I use when I'm trying to get patients to engage that pelvic floor. And what is the pelvic floor? The pelvic floor is a group of muscles that are at the bottom of your pelvis that help hold up your bladder, your uterus, and your bowel in women. If those muscles are already tense, obviously we don't need to be making them more tense. In fact, I have several patients that were given that advice and they come back with more symptoms after doing Kegels. So what is the pelvic floor connection to the core? Because it is a very important part of our core, which we use to stabilize in all of our daily activities. So let's think of the core as kind of like a can, where the front of the can is the rectus abdominis, the six-pack muscles. The sides of the can is the oblique muscles. The back of the can is the back muscles. The top of the can is the diaphragm, and the bottom of the can is the pelvic floor muscles. So it's part of our core. It's part of our system. And there's a really big connection between diaphragmatic breathing and pelvic floor function. A lot of us that are in this kind of stress response, we breathe with this shallow breath in our chest, and we use our accessory muscles because we're in the sympathetic system, which is our fight or flight. If that's the case and we're not taking deep diaphragmatic breaths, then our pelvic floor also tends to be a little bit overactive because when the diaphragm relaxes on that inhale, so does the pelvic floor. And when it lifts on the exhale, so does the pelvic floor. When the system is out of sync, it can end up causing some of the symptoms that people feel, such as leakage, pain, pressure in that pelvic floor. So, when do Kegels actually help? They can help when there is true weakness, postpartum, or with neurological issues. Sometimes when you sneeze, cough, or laugh, and there's something called stress incontinence, it can also help. However, not always. The key here is proper assessment, right? So that as a physical therapist, that's what we do. We actually take a look at what your pelvic floor muscles are doing, which no other provider actually can. They do a lot of other amazing things that we cannot, but we do test the function of the pelvic floor from a musculoskeletal perspective. So, when do Kegels not help? Kegels don't help if you're having pain with intercourse, if you're having a hard time starting your urine stream, if you're having pressure in your pelvic floor, especially if you're doing Kegels and it's making it worse, they're probably not what you need. And sometimes when those muscles are too tight and they're in that protective holding pattern, we need to do the opposite of that. And the way that we really do that is by focusing on breath, as well as exercise and stretching and mindfulness and meditation to get you out of that sympathetic response and into the parasympathetic, the rest and digest system, so that we can breathe deeply with the diaphragm and help the pelvic floor relax. So the reason why we need the pelvic floor to relax is because we want to improve range of motion and function. Think about a really tight fist. Sometimes I use this example. If you're trying to make a bigger fist, it's really difficult to do that, right? If you're already in a fist. But if you are able to extend the fingers all the way, you have more power in making that fist. It's sort of similar. So when we improve range of motion in the pelvic floor, improve relaxation, we actually get that, we actually have the strength to begin with. We just didn't know it because we are always in that upregulated, tightened position. So, biggest takeaways is Kegels are not a one size fits all remedy for pelvic floor issues. The key is to understand what the person is actually doing when they think they're doing Kegels. A lot of the time, people are actually squeezing their glute muscles. They're squeezing their adductor muscles, their inner thigh muscles, but not actually their pelvic floor. And they don't know it. They think that they're doing it. And until we do a proper assessment, which involves an internal assessment, we don't know what is going on. But once we do, it's a relatively easy solution to coordinate that breath with the pelvic floor movement and contraction and relaxation. The key is to not just Google your symptoms. The key is to see a professional that can actually do the assessment to really understand what is going on for you specifically. Pelvic health is very individual. We were told a lot of things growing up about what the pelvic floor is, what symptoms are normal, but some symptoms are common, but they're not necessarily normal, and they're very treatable, which includes leakage, which includes pelvic pain, which includes heaviness in the pelvic floor, or leaking with sneezing, coughing, jumping. So if you're having any of these symptoms, Kegels just might not be the right solution. It might be, but it's always good to know whether it truly is for you or not. So if you're curious and you're in the Metro Detroit area, you can always reach out to me. If you're not, you can Google a pelvic floor physical therapy near me to find a good provider that can actually assess the pelvic floor and see what's really going on for you. So when someone says, just go do Kegels, you know there's more to the story now. If this resonated with you, please share this with a friend, leave a review, subscribe so we can have more of these conversations. And if you'd like to connect with me, I will put this in the show notes, but you can find me on my website at sageptwellness.com or follow me on Instagram at sageptwellness. And until next time, as always, take care of your health and your wellness.